welcome back to my channel. My name is Sophie, and on my channel I share my life as a uni student and my advice for fellow students. If you want to join a positive and supportive community, make sure to subscribe. If you know my Instagram, then you probably know that I'm a bit of a stationery addict. And today's video is the first of a series I am starting where I'm going to review all of my stationery, find out what is the best and what I'd recommend for other students. We're starting with probably the most basic stationery you need, a black writing pen. I have 11 pens that I'm going to be reviewing today, all of which that I've used over the years. I'll be sharing my thoughts on each one and testing how they write. So let's begin. I'm going to be starting with one of the most popular and maybe stereotypical study brand black pens, the Muji 0.5mm black gel ink pen. The pen has a simple plastic body where you can see how much ink is left in the pen. The pens are capped with a clip. Overall, I really love the simple, sleek and modern design of the pen. I really like how it feels in my hand, and it is really comfortable to write with for long periods of time. So how does the pen write? The ink is nice and bold, and I am a particular fan of the black colour of this pen. I find that the Muji pen in particular really makes any other colours you use in your notes really pop. I also find that this pen is quite smooth to write with. You don't need to write with too much pressure, which is another reason that I find it is a really good pen for writing with for long periods of time. The pen rarely ever skips and writes boldly into pretty much the very end when it runs out of ink. On this note, I find that the pen lasts pretty well too, so I have found that sometimes this pen doesn't write as well on certain types of paper. Personally, I use the Muji paper the vast majority of the time, and this pen works incredibly well with the Muji paper, but I have used others where it isn't quite as good, and in particular it takes a bit longer to dry. Because of the gel ink, it does sometimes smudge. Overall, I'm a huge fan of this pen, and it has never really let me down. While there are some small problems, they are very manageable, and I think that the way that this pen feels in my hand and the way it writes definitely makes up for this. Overall, I would definitely recommend this pen, and I would rate it 9 out of 10. The second pen we are going to be trying out is the Sarasa pen. This is another gel pen, but this time it is a 0.7mm. This is a retractable pen. You can mostly see how much ink is left in the pen, although the bottom is covered by the grip. The body of the pen is a little thicker than the Muji pen, so it does feel a bit chunkier in my hand, especially because of the rubber grip. But overall, it is a really nice pen, and if you prefer a chunkier pen, this might be the one for you. The Sarasa ink is absolutely fantastic. As much as I love the Muji pen, in terms of ink, I do think this pen beats it. It is crazy smooth and really opaque. I've not had the ink skip once when writing, even when using multiple different pens. I think as well, one of the best parts of this pen and how it writes is just how quickly it dries, because it is essentially instant. There are no issues with smudging, no matter how quickly you run your finger or a highlighter over it. The one issue I've had with this pen is that when I use Tipp-Ex to cover mistakes, when writing over the Tipp-Ex, the ink fades slightly, so it is not the same bold colour that you usually have. Overall, this is a very good pen with truly unmatched ink. I found myself using this pen quite often in my daily life, but less for notes, because I personally don't find it as comfortable to write with for longer periods of time. It is a very reliable pen, and I would also rate it a 9 out of 10. The Ola pen is another retractable gel pen from Zebra. This pen is slimmer than the Sarasa pen and also a more consistent width throughout the whole body, whereas the Sarasa pen does get thicker near the end because of the rubber grip. The body of the pen is half rubber, which is the white you can see, and half plastic, which is the black ovals. You can partially see the ink levels through the plastic windows. Again, this is a retractable pen with a 0.7mm nib, just like the Sarasa pen. I also want to note here that I really like the design of this pen with the black and white colours, because I think it's so fun and matches the Zebra brand really well. As for how this pen writes, I would say the ink is quite similar to the Sarasa pen in how smooth it is and how quickly it dries, which again is a huge pro for this pen. I do find that it very occasionally skips. This is very rare, but I definitely would say that this makes it less reliable than the Sarasa pen. I would also say that the ink is a little bit less dark and opaque than the Sarasa pen, but again, it is one that doesn't smudge at all when highlighted, no matter the paper used. Overall, this is a good pen that again I would recommend for students. Reliable and feels very nice in the hand in my opinion, writes smoothly, and I think this would be a really great pen for writing notes and lectures. Overall, I would rate it an 8.5 out of 10. Next, we have the Zebra Z-Grip ballpoint. Of all the pens that I'm looking at today, this has the thickest barrel. It has a similar design to the Sarasa pen with the see-through barrel, so you can mostly see the ink level, but with a rubber grip at the bottom. The nib is the thickest that we've seen so far at 1mm, and again, it is a retractable pen. Because of how thick the barrel of this pen is, I don't personally find it the most comfortable to hold in my hand or to write with for long periods of time. In terms of how this writes, I'm going to start with a disclaimer that I'm not a huge fan of ballpoint pens and how they write. This is not something specific to this pen, but a general issue I have with ballpoint pens. I will say that despite this, the Z-Grip is probably the best ballpoint pen that I have used. The ink skips far less than other pens, and overall it is a very smooth writing experience. Like most ballpoint pens, the ink doesn't smudge at all with the highlighter. Overall, if you like ballpoint pens, then this is probably the best ballpoint pen you could get. It is not my favourite because of how it feels in the hand and the ink, but it is still quite a strong pen for students. I would rate it a 7 out of 10. We have another Zebra pen, this time a Zebra Smooth ballpoint. Unlike the other Zebra pens we've seen so far, this is a capped pen, and the nib actually looks quite similar to a fine liner, even though it actually still is a ballpoint. This is the thinnest pen of all the ones I'm looking at today, and it also feels super light. I find it really comfortable to hold in my hand. One thing I'm not a huge fan of, however, is that you can't see the ink levels or even deconstruct the pen to see how much is left. But how does it write? As I have already stated, I'm not typically a fan of ballpoints, but I have to say that this pen does not write at all like a ballpoint. As the name suggests, the pen is incredibly smooth to write with, and I'd even go as far to say that it is the smoothest pen of all the pens I'm looking at today. The ink is also nice and dark and doesn't skip in my experience. I have found that sometimes the pen smudges depending on the paper you were using on. Overall, this is a great little pen in my opinion. It's definitely not as well constructed as some of the other pens, but it is still reliable and feels really nice to write with. I think this would be a really good pen just to have a couple in your bag for when you need to jot something down or lend a pen to someone. Overall, I would rate this pen a 7.5 out of 10. Next, we have the Zebra 901 ballpoint pen. This is a super sleek pen that I think is probably one of the nicest pens that I'm looking at today. The design is really classic and sophisticated. The top part is stainless steel, and then the colour part of the lower barrel is plastic. This is another retractable ballpoint pen with a 0.7 or 1mm nib. I'm showing you the silver version, but you can also get this pen in lots of different colours to match your style. For example, the hot pink, rose gold, and pastel teal. Overall, this pen feels really nice in the hand. It's got a good weight to it compared to the other pens, which means it stays balanced when writing. Honestly, I think where this pen falls down a little bit is how it writes. This is a ballpoint pen, and in my opinion, it really writes like it. The ink is mostly smooth to write with, but when first writing, the pen does skip slightly. The ink is quite dark, but it does have that shine of all ballpoint pens. Also, I find that when you're writing for a little bit, the lines get less bold, and in some parts are a little bit faded, especially if you aren't using that much pressure. This is another pen that can smudge a bit from your finger or highlighter, as it takes a couple seconds to dry properly, especially on certain types of paper. But if you give it that extra time, it is fine and doesn't smudge much at all. Overall, I am a bit conflicted about this pen. I love the design and it's probably my favourite looking pen, however I find the writing experience is not what I personally like. But if you like ballpoint pens, this may be the one for you, but personally I can only rate it a 6 out of 10. Next, we're going to be looking at the Uni-ball pen, which has a sleek plastic barrel. The one I'm using today has a fully black barrel, but you can also get it in white. I also want to take a moment to point out the clip at the top of the pen, because I'm a really big fan of this metal wire design. The thickness of the barrel is consistent all the way through the pen, because even though it does have a rubber grip at the bottom of the pen, this rubber grip is integrated within the pen barrel, so it does not add extra thickness, which I really appreciate. This is a retractable pen with a 0.5mm nib. Overall, I would say that this pen is still a bit thicker than what I personally like in my hand, but overall it is a nice feel in the hand. This is a rollerball gel pen which writes nice and smoothly. It's not as smooth as some of the zebra pens, and I think it is comparable to the Muji gel. I have found that this pen occasionally skips slightly when writing, although it's very small and isn't very obvious. The ink is quite nice, but I do find that it's not as bold as some of the other gel pens I've used, notably the Muji pen. It smudges very slightly when highlighting on certain kinds of paper, but it's not very significant, especially if you give it that extra couple of seconds to dry. Overall, this is a good pen. It isn't as fantastic as some of the others I have tried, but I would still definitely recommend this to fellow students. It's a reliable, simple pen for everyday notes, especially if you prefer a chunkier body with a thinner pen nib. Overall, I would rate this pen 7 out of 10. The next pen we're going to look at is the Uni-ball Eye Designer pen, which is a sleek plastic pen. I really like the subtle checkerboard design on the main barrel of the pen. It is a really nice thickness, slightly thicker than the Muji pen, but still thinner than the zebra Sarasa and previous Uni-ball pen. When you take the cap off, there is also a window so you can see when you're about to run out of ink, which I really appreciate. It has a neat 0.7mm nib. Overall, this pen feels really good in the hand, and is one I think would be very comfortable to write with for long periods of time. Now for the writing experience. This pen has liquid ink and also has a unique system so the pen doesn't jam or skip at all. It is also really smooth to write with, and you don't need to use much pressure at all, which again makes it really good to write with for longer periods of time. The ink is super dark and bold, and I'm a big fan of it. However, I have noticed that because it is liquid ink, it can bleed a little bit on certain types of paper, and it can even ghost through the paper, which is a little bit annoying. It doesn't smudge at all from your hand, but as you can see in the video, the liquid ink does smudge quite a bit when highlighted. Overall, this is quite a good pen. It feels great in the hand and I mostly like the ink. However, as I explained, it does have some problems because of the liquid ink. Overall, I would rate this pen 7 out of 10. This next pen is a slightly different version of the Uni-ball Eye pen, this time the Eye Ocean Care. This is a pen I was recently sent, so I can't currently speak for how long it lasts, but because the barrel is entirely a window to see the ink, I can say that there appears to be lots of ink in it, so I would guess that it does last for quite a while. This pen is quite special because it is made of 75% recycled plastic, 10% of which are harvested from the ocean. This is a capped pen with a 0.5mm nib. Again, like the previous Eye Designer pen, this Ocean Care eye pen feels really nice, and I don't really have any complaints whatsoever on how it feels in your hand. As for the writing experience, I think that overall I would argue that this pen fixes quite a few of the problems of the previous eye pen while retaining all of the positives, such as how smooth it is to write with and a dark black ink. I much prefer this line width, especially with this liquid ink. Because the ink is so bold and dark, I think the thinner line of the 0.5mm looks a bit better, especially with a whole page of handwriting. This ink doesn't bleed on certain types of paper like the Eye Designer does, and while it does ghost a little bit, this is much less than the previous pen. As well as this, it doesn't smudge as much when highlighted. Overall, I think this is a great pen and it solves some of the problems that I had with the other version of the Uni-ball Eye pen. I really like writing with this one, and I can see myself using it a lot more when studying in the future. Overall, I would rate this pen an 8 out of 10. Next, we have another liquid ink pen, this time the Pilot V-Ball pen. This pen has a similar general design as the Uni-ball Eye pens, although the barrel does feel slightly slimmer. Most of the barrel is not see-through, but under the cap there is a window where you can see when the pen is about to run out. I will say that when I was using this pen consistently a few years ago, I did think that it ran out quite quickly compared to other pens I've used. Overall, it feels quite similar in the hand to the Eye Designer pens. One small complaint that I have is that the tip of the pen is a bit rough, which I find can be quite uncomfortable to hold and write with for longer periods of time. The pen has a nice smooth writing experience with no skipping whatsoever, as typical for liquid ink, and the ink itself is clear and bold. It's got a great dark black colour, which remains consistent until it fully runs out. Like with the Uni-ball Eye pens, this liquid ink does perform differently depending on the type of paper you are writing on. It also goes through most paper. I have found that it doesn't smudge much at all from your hand or even too much from a highlighter. Overall, this is a decent pen. The ink is consistent and bold, and I like the design. However, I did stop using this pen because I found that it doesn't last that long compared to others, and it is a bit uncomfortable to write with for longer periods of time. Therefore, I would rate this pen 6 out of 10. The final pen I will be looking at today is the Pentel Feel It capped ballpoint. This is a fairly long pen with a see-through plastic barrel so you can see the ink level. It does have a rubber grip, which I'm personally not a fan of because it is especially thick and not integrated with the pen at all. As well as this, the grip is quite high up and isn't actually where I would normally hold my pen, so it's kind of useless to me as a grip. This cap pen has a 1mm nib. Overall, it does feel mostly nice in the hand, and I quite like the length of it. The only downside is the rubber grip, as I previously mentioned. But how does it write? The line is a bit thicker than I personally like. It also suffers with quite a lot of the normal problems with ballpoints. The ink, while mostly smooth, does skip occasionally, especially when you're first writing. The black ink is also the least bold of all the pens I've looked at, as well as having the typical ballpoint ink sheen. For the ink to remain bold, you need to use quite a bit of pressure, so I don't think I could comfortably write with this pen for long periods of time. But I have found that it doesn't smudge at all, which is really good. Overall, I think this is personally my least favourite of all the pens, partially because of the issues that I have with ballpoints in general, and also because it isn't the most comfortable pen to hold. Overall, I would rate this pen 5 out of 10. So those were all my thoughts on the black writing pens that I own. I hope that this video has helped you find out a bit more about each of these pens and will help you find the right pen for you. For other students, I would personally recommend the Muji 0.5mm black gel ink pen or the Zebra 0.7mm Sarasa gel ink pen. If you prefer ballpoint pens, I'd recommend the Zebra Smooth ballpoint or the Z-Grip, and if you like liquid ink, I'd recommend the Uni-ball Eye Ocean pen. Make sure to tell me your thoughts on these pens or others in the comments. What is your favourite pen to write with? Did I review my other stationery, and if so, what do you want to see? So that's the video, and I'll see you in the next one.